Witches just can't seem to catch a break. For whatever reason, no matter how many times witches fight alongside fairies and specialists to save the magic dimension, nor how many times prolific witches like Cloud Tower's headmistress Griffin battle alongside her fellow Company of Light alumni, Farragonda and Saladin, against the forces of evil, it's just assumed witches are evil because witches are evil. End of story. That's it. That's a wrap.
There's the Witches' School at Cloud Tower.
Witches? Wow.
Yeah, well, better steer clear of them.
But why is that? Why do we, or rather, the show itself, assume this of witches automatically, no matter how often they prove themselves? Why are witches met with such scrutiny and skepticism, and seen as inferior to fairies? And is this a part of a long trend of our need to persecute women who accrue power of their own and refuse to kowtow to conventional social structures? You girly pops already know the answer. Yes, the answer is yes. And it's time to talk about it. Before we begin, hello, my name's Thomas, aka the Unicorn of War, and I make videos about various animated media, including Winx Club, Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, and Fairy Tail. And I'm continually branching out to new media. Really, I just like to talk about whatever I am enjoying at the moment and dissecting it from a writer's perspective. Given my love of storytelling, it helps me to better understand why I love the media I do, how media may or may not resonate with me, and share those thoughts to hopefully entertain y'all. If you're interested and would like to support myself and the channel, I have a Patreon with multiple tiers and rewards for supporters. $1 patrons have access to my private Discord server, the Union of War, where you can join a community of mostly queer nerds. You can also get your Patreon username in video credits and early access to videos and video scripts. $5 patrons can request writing critiques for pieces up to 5,000 words, and quarterly Q&A videos about me, what projects I'm working on, and so on. $10 patrons get content requests, monthly livestream hangouts, and Patreon-exclusive videos, video series, and analyses, including my currently available character analysis of Bloom. That is for patrons, and I'm going to be doing analyses for the rest of the Winx, and probably more specific characters going forward. This will be for like the super niche girlies, so I don't have to worry about the algorithm. And finally, $20 patrons get sneak peeks at whatever novels I'm working on, the ability to get signed novels, which you'll need to DM me for mailing details, and novel audiobook chapters narrated by yours truly. If all of that sounds interesting to you, consider pledging your support. No pressure though, if you can't and you need to mind your finances, I get it. Times are tough. Any support is appreciated. Now, without further ado, this is why everyone hates witches, and why everyone is an idiot for doing so. The magical universe is home to many different magical creatures. Wizards, elves, mermaids, leprechauns, and, well, what I assume to be humans with some kind of magic in them, despite never using it. In any case, the lines between what is innate and what is learned are a bit fuzzy with certain classical fantasy creatures, especially for fairies and witches, the two most prominent guardians of the magical universe. Magix, the capital and heart of the magical universe, is home to 3 magic colleges: Althea College for fairies, Cloud Tower College for witches, and Red Fountain College for specialists, students at each school hone their skills in order to become defenders of the magic dimension, with the fairies obviously receiving the most attention given that the Winx are all fairies. And given the schools are each headed by former members of the Company of Light, there is meant to be an eternal alliance between the 3 colleges should a crisis arise. Emphasis on meant to be. Throughout the first season, there is a strong rivalry between fairies and witches. They're quite similar in the fact that each fairy and witch has a unique source of power. For example, you have Stella as the fairy of the sun and moon, and Stormy as the witch of, well, storms. The main difference seems to be how they draw upon their magic. We don't learn more about this until season 2, but fairies draw upon light and positive emotions, whereas witches feed upon darkness and negative emotions.
Many of our spells require darkness as a primary source of energy, and so it's important to learn to subdue light.
While the Winx study as exchange students at Cloud Tower, Griffin leads them in an exercise where they have to channel negative memories and dark emotions. The more intense, the stronger the magic gathered.
Even senior witches don't summon magic that dark. Well, I've had a bad week.
Griffin and the witches also scoff when Flora suggests that the students study in pairs or groups. For witches, teamwork is not the standard, as witches are taught to be fierce and independent.
Aren't we gonna divide up in groups to practice first?
In groups? Witches working in groups? Listen up, fairies. Team members can betray one another. That's why a witch depends on no one but herself.
This is at odds with Griffin working with Farragonda and Saladin, and even the formation of covens like the Ancestral Witches or the Tricks. But perhaps it's one of those things that were not thought through, given the show really just is not interested in the details of witchcraft, but we'll get there later, oh god. During season 1, witches are primarily antagonistic. While the fairies aspire to date the jock archetypes that are the specialists, they're told never to set foot on Cloud Tower's campus, lest they face the wrath of the witches.
Stay away from the witches of Cloud Tower no matter what. We don't have a punishment for that, since nothing we could do would be as terrible as what they will do to you if they catch you there.
Griffin also encourages her students to antagonize the Althea fairies time and time again, both for their school dances.
We'll kick off the year with a school-wide competition. It will be wicked. The objective simple and cruel. It is to sabotage Althea's precious back-to-school dance. The winners will receive a gift certificate to Albert Zombie and Witch.
And for their own personal lives.
Do whatever it takes. Break some hearts, break some bones, I don't care. Just to make sure that by the end of the day, pixie eyes are filled with tears.
It's honestly just so bizarre and disorienting seeing how antagonistic Griffin was early on, when it is so polarized with how she is at the end of season 1, along with seasons 2 and 3.
You and the Coven were going to destroy entire worlds, and that was wrong, Baltor.
No, Griffin, you were the one who was wrong.
It's giving we needed someone to egg on the Tricks to, do their antagonistic things, but we didn't want to think through whether this was going to be consistent with how we wanted Griffin's character to be the whole time. Still, the witch students themselves could be argued as being more antagonistic because they are under the direct influence of the Tricks, especially in the 4Kids dub as senior witches with lots of social capital and influence. The Tricks could sway their classmates into harassing the fairies of Althea in force, especially the Winx. That's kind of how it goes when the witches chase Musa through Magic City.
Let's mess her up.
Yeah, you're good at trash talking. Why don't you show me what you got?
I will. The entire Cloud Tower senior class is here, and I'm gonna make an example out of you.
In general, nobody likes witches. When Brandon learns that Bloom might be a witch, he basically abandons her and then stops talking to her for several episodes. So, yeah, Sky ain't shit.
I'm a witch.
A witch? No way. It can't be. That's impossible.
What does this mean? Brandon?
He's trash. The trauma of the person I'm romantically interested in as she learns she might not be who she thought she was? Yeah, I don't care. I'm just gonna throw her away because she might be an icky witch. But when the Tricks acquire the Dragon Flame and take over Cloud Tower, they battle Griffin and imprison her and all of the witch students. The witches don't join the Tricks' conquest. Instead, they rally with the fairies and specialists once they are freed by Bloom and Stella's group, helping to defend Althea and defeat the Tricks and their army of decay. Yes, I still call it that because it's a superior name. From then on, the relationship between fairies and witches is a bit more amicable, or at the very least civil. The Winx still are not fond of witches, especially when Farragonda sends them to Cloud Tower to learn about dark magic and to defend their part of the Codex. Nor are they exactly forced to unpack their prejudices.
Yeah, right. And I don't even like being in a crowd where there's a single witch.
But they did help us fight the Tricks last year.
You seem to forget that they helped the Tricks fight us a bunch of times.
Instead, they just kind of take over protecting the Codex and failing, with the witches mostly taking a back seat. I love season 2, but this is such a missed opportunity. And then you have season 3, where witches are again victims, this time of Valtor. Some witches see a deer being chased by wolves, inviting it into the castle to protect it.
Hey, look over there. We can't just leave him there. I'll go get him.
We're gonna ignore the 4Kids dub trying to lure the deer and turn into a potion because, oh god, that's a yikes.
The white-haired
hair of a deer is used in like 30 potions. Come on!
Turns out the deer was Valtor in disguise, using this to enter Cloud Tower as an invited guest so that he could take it over. He tells the witches, next time you see a fawn, be a wolf. So this is showing witches can be capable of kindness and goodness, right? Season 3 continues with the witches being victims as they're brainwashed into serving Valtor, unwillingly laying siege to Althea and attacking the Winx when they arrive. With this treatment, you would assume that maybe we delve into the fact that witches aren't inherently evil, or even debate what good and evil mean in the first place. But instead, witches are continually pushed to the sidelines, and only invoked when we need conflict. It gets worse in later seasons, considering the fact that they are not even present at all for seasons 4, 5, or 7, and they only appear in like one episode of season 8. And it's season 8, so who's gonna watch that? And when they're brought back in season 6, it's because the Tricks, once again, conquer Cloud Tower and use it as their base to attack all the other magic colleges. And somehow, the witches in this case are more than willing to work under the Tricks, despite everything that the Tricks have done to them and their school.
Soon, the witches will rule over the entire magic dimension, and nothing will be able to stop us!
Tricks! Tricks! Tricks!
It is so bizarre and exhausting the way that season 6 just fully gives up on trying to humanize witches, giving completely into the idea of witches being inherently evil. Headmistress Griffin is against them, of course, but she's reduced to a supporting character who does nothing to take back her school from the Tricks. It's as if her goodness as a witch is just ignored completely, which is so baffling. And going back to the differences between fairies and witches not being inherent, we learn that in actuality, witches can become fairies, and presumably vice versa through Myrta. 4Kids even uses the term trans magic.
It's that trans magic loser, Myrta!
You know that girl?
Yeah, she claims to be a fairy who just happened to be born into a witch's body.
We love 2000s transcoding. With Myrta realizing over the course of the first season that witch magic just is not for her, transferring to Althea in season 2 and becoming a fairy. It really calls into question why the fairies and witches divide themselves so much. While Myrta is bullied by Lucy and other witches for becoming a fairy, it's clear the narrative supports her, as it should if this is what makes her happy. However, we never see the same depiction of the inverse, a fairy becoming a witch. The only time this happens is with Selena, a major antagonist of season 6. Her backstory makes absolutely no sense and destroys canon, but ignoring that, she was once a fairy who became a witch to serve the dark sorcerer Acheron.
Show me what you've got.
Now you are the Witch of Snakes.
By the end of the season, when Selena redeems herself, she just goes back to being a fairy, studying under the fairy godmother Eldora.
Fairy godmother, would you ever consider letting me study with you again? To become a better fairy?
She goes back to being quote-unquote good by becoming a fairy. Thanks, I hate it. What this suggests is that the narrative considers fairies to be good and witches to be evil, except Griffin because we can't be bothered to acknowledge how she proves this dichotomy is wrong. Any prejudice towards witches goes unchecked because the show agrees with it, that the Winx and others are right to be skeptical of the witches, even as most witches prove that they are good or, at the very least, neutral people who fight against evil time and time again. And just like the specialists, we don't learn the intricacies of what it is to study a cloud tower and to be a guardian witch. Actually, the term guardian witch does not even exist in show. At all. Like, what are witches when they graduate? Like, fairies are guardian fairies, what are witches? While fairies very clearly have a base form, then Charmix, and then finally Enchantix as full-fledged guardian fairies, witches don't get this. The only witch forms we see are specifically for the tricks given to them by villains like Darkar or Valtor. So it's clear the show just is not interested in exploring what it means to be a witch in this show, like the fairies. But why is that? Well, for that, we have to explore the source material of witches in the real world, and why exactly so much media and so many people have such unfavorable views of witches. Now, I am by no means an expert in witches or witchcraft, so I'm merely gonna report my own knowledge, as well as knowledge I've gathered on the subject, very briefly. This is not comprehensive in the slightest. For further research, I recommend PhilosophyTube's video Witchcraft, Gender, and Marxism. Gods, I hope saying Marxism does not get me demonetized. But history, being patriarchal, has not been kind to powerful women who are leaders of their communities. Women, and virtually anyone at the margins of social convention and hegemony, have been demonized and called witches when they have behaved in any way which goes against said hegemony, in addition to the view of any non-Christian beliefs as pagan and deviant. The legacy of both of these things has resulted in witches being seen as dark, evil creatures who practice vile dark arts and occultism in service to, you guessed it, the Christian devil, because we just assume everyone believes in our institutionalized religion, even if they are not Christians themselves. It's why there's so much misinformation on Satanism and Wicca, and why people think pentagrams are demonic when they're actually symbols of protection, you dum-dums. While there have been more favorable depictions of witches throughout media recently, there is still this ingrained, generally negative connotation that witches are inherently or are more predisposed to being evil. This is why witches are written off in Winx Club. They rely on the mainstream knowledge most people have of witches through cultural osmosis, rather than taking the existing lore of witches and reimagining it, challenging our traditional ideas of what a witch can be. And that's very convenient because we want the witches to be antagonistic towards the fairies, our main girlies. We're pinning the women against the women. It's the way that they have it structured so that we can unpack these things in the show and have that be a major point in the story and for our themes. And they just don't touch it. They just don't do anything with it. Like, what? It's right there. It's right there. It's so ready for you to unpack, and you never do. You just leave it on the floor, frustrating me. So, how could Winx have remedied this? Well, for starters, let's look at the concept of yin and yang, which WizGiz conveniently mentions during Season 2.
In the universe, there is no light without darkness. When a form of energy is created, it produces an opposite force, equally strong.
There are many ancient beliefs and religions built on dualism, the concept of two opposing natural forces whose dynamic influences the world's happenings. Yin and yang specifically is a Chinese philosophy that describes the harmonious coexistence of two complementary opposite forces. I discussed this a bit in my video on the problems with spirits in Legend of Korra, but yin and yang does not entail two forces fighting each other for domination. For that, go for Zoroastrianism, but rather two forces which are interdependent, neither of which being good or evil. This is how I view fairies and witches in the magic dimension. They are inherently neutral forces who can either be guardians or villains. Just because witches draw upon darkness and negativity does not make them evil, nor does a fairy's reliance on light and positivity make her good. The purpose of their coexistence is to balance each other out. With fairies and witches having different approaches to protecting their worlds, it allows them to cover all their bases, so to speak, so that they can work together to fend off any crisis which threatens the magical universe. Unfortunately, this balance was disrupted by the ancestral witches, who terrorized the magic dimension in search of the dragon flame, and ultimately destroyed Domino. It's likely that this event traumatized the worlds, inspiring a fear and distrust in witches because of the actions of three. This would also explain why witches are so hostile towards others. When your entire group is written off as a marginalized and dangerous one, you're unlikely to trust outsiders and even to scorn them. And frankly, I don't see Faragonda and Saladin doing enough to fight this anti-witch prejudice in their schools. But that might just be because they still carried unchecked skepticism towards their former ally Griffin, given she once worked for the ancestral witches. I would like to see the Winx's anti-witch prejudices checked as well, specifically Musa's. Yes, she was a victim of harassment by the Tricks and witches who followed them, but that does not excuse her viewing all witches as evil and worthy of contempt, especially since I'm pretty sure a broomstick in the 4Kids dub is a witch slur.
How dare you! Bring it on, broomstick!
They need to be made to confront their distrust of witches and actually overcome them so that they can work with the witches to defeat the Tricks. Murda should not only call out the Winx on their prejudice, but also dismiss praise for becoming a fairy. Or rather, she should emphasize that she did not choose to be a fairy because she wanted to be good, but that she just felt it was right for her personally. That most of the witches she was classmates with were good people who kind of had a good reason for disliking fairies for the way that the fairies treated them. And we definitely need a fairy who transitions to becoming a witch, doesn't do so to become evil, and does not go back to being a fairy at the end. Basically, let Selena stay a witch, please. Please, God, please. It's so easy, please. The Tricks perhaps represent a view where witches embrace this villainy, handed down to them by the ancestral witches. They want witches to be cruel, vicious, and out for themselves, willing to destroy anyone for the pursuit of their personal desires. This is why they resent Griffin so much. Griffin represents the true nature of a guardian witch who uses her powers to not only serve herself, but to protect others. Oh, also, more evil and antagonistic fairies, please. If they tend to fall on the light side of things, probably self-righteous fairies who view themselves as saviors, but in reality are judgmental, holier-than-thou jerks who are just as destructive as the ancestral witches. Witches in Winx Club deserve better. They're not these inherently evil people, but rather rely upon darkness to defend their worlds just like the fairies do. And perhaps we need to be kinder to witches in all media and not just write them off as evil ladies. Maybe some of them are, but you know, I support women's wrongs. Anyhow, if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this from me, then be sure to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications because YouTube hates creators. Also, please consider, if you're willing and able, pledging your support for myself and the channel over on Patreon for Discord access, exclusive video content, writing critiques, and more. And if you're interested, check out my urban fantasy novel, Diseneribus from the Ashes, wherever books are sold. I'm the Unicorn of War, and to be a witch in the magic dimension is just to live in a perpetual shitshow.